For more on all this, let's go ahead and bring in Boer Deng. She's the Washington correspondent for the UK publication The Times. And Boer, I just want to start where Toby finished there. The Senate, we know where this is going in the House. The Democratic majority there clearly wants Trump impeached. That doesn't necessarily equal removal. That will have to go for the Senate for them to decide, and it's controlled by Republicans. Most of them are defending Trump, but we are starting to see some cracks there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Roee. I think a lot of senators, especially those who are quite nervous in the upcoming 2020 election with their seats being up for re-election in states that tend to be a bit more to the center, are sort of looking very nervously at whether or not to support the president and how far to support the president. People like Susan Collins of Maine, who's more known as a centrist, moderate kind of senator. You have a few people who have already been vocal a little bit in criticizing the president in the Senate, people like Mitt Romney of Utah, Ben Sasse of North Dakota. And the question is how far will actually break? And as you mentioned, you need a 2/3 majority in the Senate to actually remove the president after he's impeached.
The White House has been instructing officials not to comply with subpoenas, and we're seeing some ignoring them. What do you make of that defiance?
First of all, I think a lot of these officials have been getting quite a lot of credit, especially from Democrats and people who sort of see what the president did as wrong or impeachable for sort of being brave enough to come out and actually defy the administration who they serve at the pleasure of. This past week, we saw the testimony of Bill Taylor, who is a senior diplomat, the senior diplomat in charge of Ukraine, who had this testimony on Tuesday that was seen as quite stunning, and that he really broke from the president and the very next day went back to Ukraine to continue to serve out his job. We saw later in the week that another Pentagon official, Laura Cooper, who came again in defiance of what she had been told, her testimony was actually stopped for quite a few hours because there were Republicans who sort of came and charged into the room to prevent her from testifying. And I think it's a signal to others who might be willing to come forward that, you know, there have already been sort of quite high-profile people who are willing to do this. Certainly it's a bit of encouragement, I think, for anyone who's willing to go forward and testify.
Donald Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, speaking out accidentally, we understand leaving a voicemail for a journalist, and in it he mentions needing cash and also trashing the Bidens. This was a call using, if you will, his rear end to call this journalist or redial the journalist. Are they getting sloppy?
I mean, I think every journalist in Washington right now is hoping that Rudy Giuliani will call them in the middle of the night unexpectedly and sort of unleash something he doesn't mean to unleash. But I think for a while people have questioned Giuliani's strategy, and even people in the White House who have told the president, look, you know, we're not entirely sure what your personal lawyer is doing. Every time he goes on television, he seems to disclose something, and now we've learned sometimes even when he's not on television, he's disclosing things. So I think we'll see what happens, and we'll see whether the president continues to stick by him.
And all of this is playing out as the Dems are fighting out for their nomination. How is that affecting that process?
So I think several things have happened that have really tightened the race, especially in view of the impeachment inquiry and the focus on the Bidens. For Mr. Biden, although he has been able to maintain his lead in some polls, he's also having to face more questions about his son. There's sort of this question of, well, you know, he's an establishment candidate. Is this really the time for that? And it's kind of given some room for other candidates like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders to make their pitch as anti-establishment and really going after the corruption and the sort of entrenchedness of politics in Washington.
Boer Deng, thank you as always for your insight. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.